It's gonna be a great program. I know you're a little bit under the weather, so I thank you for allowing me to talk you into coming on anyways. Things are escalating. There's, in August, there were 30,000 troops made up of Houthis, people from Iraq and so forth, gathering in Syria. As of this morning, 40,000 in Syria. That's on the northern border of Israel. We're looking at that. Bill, I want to take just a minute here because I want to let everybody know this too. So we were, I got an email. It couldn't have been at the most, I'd say 25 minutes ago. It was from the Ministry of Tourism in Israel, and they're saying, I feel really, my heart just breaks, and they're asking if we can still come to Israel, if you can, groups will come. Israel's still open for tours, and you can hear the difficulty that they're under, the strain, because people aren't going. Bill, we actually have 4 tours planned in 2025, one in March, one in June. My wife and I don't think you know this, Bill, Jackie and I are supposed to be going there next week. And we'll see, we'll be in Vegas with Billy Crone and Brandon this weekend. And then Jackie and I, as of right now, our plane hasn't canceled. We really want to get there and just be able to support our friends in Israel. And, they're being so isolated, and anti-Semitism is everywhere. But when I got this email from the Ministry of Tourism, literally just before we came on and read it, my heart just breaks. And I want to encourage you, everybody, pray for Israel. As they said in the email, they're intent to keeping you safe. The fighting is in certain areas. You don't go there, but I just feel bad for them. I'm looking forward to going there next week, Lord willing, if our plane doesn't cancel. But so much to talk about, and this is live, so send in your questions. We'll be able to get them from the website. We know we're live on X, we're live on YouTube, we're live on pretty much all over the place. So please send in your questions, so we want to answer them. Bill, again, thank you for joining me. I've done enough talking myself already, but so much to going on. My dad texted me last night, Bill, and this is what he said. I'm thinking Bill Salus was right on the Psalm 83 war. And, we don't want to get wrapped up in the emotion of a moment, but look at all this going on. We live in amazing days, and we know Israel's going to be victorious. But at the same time, Bill, what do you make of the escalation that we are watching from October 7th to where we are, even as of just the last couple of hours?
Well, I think a lot of these things that we're starting to see unfold were predicted, through the prophets a couple thousand years ago, 3,000 years ago. Psalm 83, perhaps one of them with Asaph, 3,000 years ago. We've gotten prophecies with Jeremiah and Ezekiel dealing with Iran. Ezekiel 38 talks about Persia, and that's Ezekiel 38 prophecy many of your viewers are familiar with. But there's also one in Jeremiah chapter 49 written about 20 years before Ezekiel wrote on Elam. And when you look at a modern day map of Iran, Elam hugs the Persian Gulf. It's about a third of the size of modern day Iran in its ancient territory. And Persia is the other 2/3. So, we've got Iran's been written about. And we've seen, of course, Hezbollah. There's some Hezbollah prophecies. You and I talked about some of those in a prior show. So I think a lot of these things we're seeing unfold now, we were wondering when they would start to happen. And now they're starting to happen. And the question is, are they going to actually start to lead to the fulfillment of prophecies, or just more stage setting, Tom?
So I was in Wisconsin this past weekend, met a lot of wonderful people out there. And one of the gentlemen I met, his name was Don. And Don had asked me, I wanted to hear your thoughts on Don Redinger. Thank you, Don, for asking this. And his question was regarding the judgment of Elam as mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 49. You've written extensively about this. We've done a video together where I asked you questions about that. We actually have a documentary that the two of us have done. I got to ask you questions. You got to give all the answers. It was just great. But in the mention in Jeremiah, Elam would be basically destroyed and all of the people scattered until the return of Christ. But how do you you can see the documentary that Bill and I did. Great, everybody, just great opportunity to learn more. But how do you see this with Elam? Kind of put it in a nutshell where people can get their minds around it, because sometimes there's so many things in here, it can be overwhelming. What would be your summary of it?
Absolutely. Let's do the Reader's Digest version on that. We want to get to some of the questions from your viewers. The book that's sitting next to you, Tom, The Future War Prophecies, is my latest book. And I actually get into this prophecy of Elam in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39. And basically, it's the 6 verses are real easy to explain. Basically, what happens is that a time is going to come where the Lord is fiercely angry with Iran. Now, let's geographically isolate Elam from Persia. Elam hugs the Persian Gulf. It has always been geographically separated from Persia by the Zagros Mountains, mountain range that separated the two territories. Now, of course, it's all modern-day Iran today, but when Jeremiah wrote, he distinctly wrote about Elam. He knew about Persia, as did Ezekiel knew about Elam, but they both had their own separate prophecies, because I believe they're distinctly different prophecies. And I actually think the Elam prophecy could be the one we should be watching for first of the two. Now, Elam right now is where there's a Bashar nuclear reactor there. It's a dangerous place. If there's a war or a major earthquake could happen in that area, it's very seismic there. But also, it's where all the underground missile, I won't say all of them, but the majority of Iran's underground missile silos, portable rocket launchers, their hypersonic ballistic missiles, their underground air base is all in that territory there. It's a highly strategic target to be hit. Because if you're going to go try to take out the nuclear facilities, which Israel will probably have to do here shortly, inside of Iran proper, and Tehran and Natanz, et cetera, in those areas, you got to go through the Elam territory to get there, and that's where the defense shields are and things like that. So it's going to be a big issue then. What the prophecy says, at some point the Lord's going to be fiercely angry with Elam, or Iran at this case. But why? Because he's upset with the leaders. It says he will destroy from there the kings and the princes. But why would you destroy kings and princes? Because they want to launch something lethal somewhere. So he says, I'm going to break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might, because they want to launch something lethal, probably nuclear, at the foremost of their might. That would be nuclear, probably. Where, we're not told where they want to launch it, but probably that would be Israel. They want to wipe Israel off of the map. And it says as a result, the Lord will create a disaster in this territory. So he's going to be angry at the leadership. He's going to destroy from the kings and the princes. He's going to break the bow. That would be like their missile launching capabilities. And that's where they mostly are all hidden underground over there in Elam territory. Create a massive disaster, and the disasters of the magnitude that it creates a humanitarian crisis, because we're told that he will bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven and scatter all the Elamites, the indigenous population, into all those winds. It says there'll be no nations, plural. The outcasts of Elam don't go. Also, it talks about he will consume them with the sword, which is a typology biblically of war. The good news is, and I think your question that the guy asked from Wisconsin is, well, what's the good news for the Iranians in this situation? It says in Jeremiah 49, verses 38, I will set my throne in Elam, which has many Iranians who are converting to Christianity excited about this passage. And it says in Jeremiah 49, verses 39, that I will restore the fortunes and the captives of Elam back to their territory. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a worldwide dispersion as a result of this disaster. And those who survive the tribulation, and that'll be hard to do, of course, but there will be an Iranian remnant, like there'll be a Jewish remnant, and a Syrian and an Egyptian remnant, and a Jordanian remnant. There'll be an Iranian remnant. It says I will bring them back. I will restore their fortunes back to their territory. So they'd be like the sheep Gentiles of Matthew 25. If they survive through the tribulation, those who are dispersed worldwide, they'll be brought back into the land, and there will be in Iran in the millennium, or at least in Elam, I'll say.
So I have several questions that have come in I'm going to get to in just a second, but you mentioned God says, I'll set my throne there in Elam. So how do you interpret that based on his throne being in Jerusalem, and he says, I'll set my throne there? Do you interpret that to mean that what he's saying is, listen, these people are going to be turning to the Lord God Jehovah, the Lord himself during that time? Or because it reads like as if there's 2 different thrones.
Yeah, well, it's the Hebrew word kiseh, K-I-S-S-E. It's the same one that you mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 3, I think it is. It talks about my throne will be in Jerusalem in the millennium. So it's the same word, but it can mean a couple things. It can mean the throne. Maybe perhaps it'll be like, King Cyrus had a couple palaces. Maybe the Messiah will have another throne in that area. But it can also mean establish my authority in that area. So I'm not exactly sure how to interpret that. He may. I think it'd be fantastic if he had a couple thrones in the millennium, but at the very least, he's going to have his authority established there. And one of the, in those two verses, the first four verses are just terribly bad news for the Iranians. The Lord's really angry with leadership, and I think he's angry with the leadership today. This has not been historically full. The good news is, and this has got a lot of Iranians who are converting from Islam to Christianity, they're having dreams, miracles, healings. The fastest growing evangelical population in the world. These two verses have them extremely excited because God's going to set his throne there, and he's going to restore their fortunes and bring the captives back. I've been on Iran Alive television with he's the Billy Graham of Iran. And I've quoted this prophecy on satellite television to millions of Iranians, and they're very excited about this prophecy, Tom.
I am excited about it. And then when you mentioned the possibility of God has his main throne in Jerusalem, but he has another one in Elam. I mean, you start thinking of this in the millennial kingdom and things are coming. You introduced me, and thank you so much for doing it, to Dr. Hermos Shariat several years ago. And because of that, I've had the opportunity to be there too and had him on here a couple of times and hoping to have him come back out to a conference. But his insight on Iran and what the Lord is doing with salvation. Folks, when you hear about people coming to faith in Iran, God is using this man who said, "Here I am," with Iran Alive. It's just what a great brother, and being able to know him. Thank you for introducing me to him. And by the way, if you'd like to, you can get the things that Bill is talking about in the Hope for Our Time store. You can check it out, from the documentary that we've done to these books. They're going to update you and really help you to understand and get the aha. Okay, now it's making sense. And the things that Bill talks about, he goes into more detail and explains them. Okay, this first question comes from Bobby Munt. Bobby, I remember meeting you, Bobby, a couple of years ago down San Marcos, San Diego. It might have been last year. Question: how do you see peace coming to Lebanon in fulfillment of Psalm 83? I'm going to throw something else to it. How would you see peace coming to Lebanon? And we know that peace also has to come to Israel before Ezekiel 38. How do you see that?
Well, escalation is going to lead to de-escalation. That's the thing talked about on all these news channels now. That Israel's got to escalate so they can de-escalate the situation in the Middle East. Lebanon is part of Hezbollah. Has some prophecies. I believe they're Hezbollah prophecies. They're Lebanese prophecies. And they're seemingly ready to find fulfillment at the present time, meaning they probably would be related to Hezbollah. One of them is Sidon, prophecy in Ezekiel 28. We did this on a show recently, Tom, you and I, verses 20 through 26. Your viewers should take the time to read that. Sidon is about, I think it's about 30, 40 miles north, maybe 50 miles north of Israel's border. So coastal city. It's about 20 miles north of Tyre. So Sidon's in the prophecy of Ezekiel 28. Tyre's in the prophecy of Psalm 83, called the inhabitants of Tyre. And that's their sister cities. They've been listed together in the Old Testament about 17 times together. So they go hand in hand. There's another prophecy in Obadiah with Zarephath, which is a city between Tyre and Sidon. Zarephath is actually going to be possessed by the Jewish people in Obadiah 1, verse 19. And there's going to be a war in Lebanon, and it's going to involve the Sidon prophecy in Ezekiel 28. It's going to involve the Psalm 83 prophecy, and it's going to, in the process, Israel's going to capture land and territory, and part of the land and territory they're going to capture is in Lebanon. It's called Zarephath. So here's two key verses I want to read to the viewer. Obadiah 1:18 says, "The house of Jacob shall be a fire." Read that as the Israeli Defense Forces. "The house of Joseph will be a flame," also the Israeli Defense Forces. "But the house of Esau shall be stubble, and there'll be no survivor in the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken." So Esau, he fathered the Edomites. The Edomites have ethnical representation in the Palestinians. Not all Palestinians are Edomite descent, but a majority of them are. We can trace that. And basically, there's going to be a war. Israel's going to win. And I think it's all part of the Psalm 83 bigger war situation that precedes Ezekiel 38. But here's the key verse. It says, And the south shall possess the mountains of Esau, that would be southern Jordan. And the lowlands shall possess Philistia, that is where the Hamas are in Gaza. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria, that takes you up to the West Bank. Benjamin shall possess Gilead. Verse 20, and the captives of this host of children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. Zarephath is in Lebanon, about 30 miles north of Israel's border. So they're going to move in. They're going to take out Sidon. They're already talking about putting ground troops into Lebanon at this point. That would be devastating. This would really escalate everything real promptly, and that could happen real soon. But ultimately, they're going to win the war, and they're going to take over land. They're going to take over most all of Jordan. They're going to take over 5 cities in Egypt, according to Isaiah 19:18. They're going to take over Zarephath as well. That's when you'll have peace in the Lebanon area. But you still got the Ezekiel 38 war that's going to follow this. So, I don't know how much peace they're going to have per se, but ultimately Israel's going to expand incrementally, territorially. Ultimately, they'll get all the land they were promised in Genesis 15:18 from the river of Egypt to probably the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through Syria and Iraq. They're going to get all that in the millennium, but they're going to get some incrementally beforehand.
I look at this and think in my mind, with all the hatred that is directed toward Israel. I mean, I'm watching the Western media, where, it doesn't seem like the media, the U.S. government, the U.K., Canada, you're just not finding favor going towards Israel. How could Israel expand its borders, but without the world just absolutely coming against them? I mean, just the other day, the UN votes to make Jerusalem Jew-free, so they expand their borders. At the same time, how can Israel not, if they're going to keep themselves safe, by pushing back? You have the DMZ line. I've seen it, when you stand up there, Mount Bentel and the Golan Heights. Well, they had that, but obviously Hezbollah has invaded the Israel space. So I mean, you look at this. How will Israel be able to expand its borders? We know Israel will. We know that has to happen because God promised Israel a lot more land than they've ever possessed, way more than they have right now. So we know it's going to happen. But in my mind, it's hard to see, with all of the world pressure against Israel, Israel's going to say, okay, our borders are bigger now, and we push back the enemy. I mean, it's like we have not just Hamas supporters, we have Hezbollah supporters who say Israel committed an evil terrorist attack when they used the pagers to target terrorists. It's amazing to watch the media.
Well, you make a good point, Tom. They will meet with resistance, but they will actually take the territory. They've got a history of doing this. Joshua did it 3,300 years ago. King David and King Solomon did it 3,000 years ago. Israel did it in 1967. They nearly tripled their size. Of course, they shrunk some of it by forfeiting the Gaza and the Sinai issues, the Sinai territory. But they will meet with resistance because there's a lot of Muslim countries that don't want Israel to, they'll be upset when they win the war and take out the Arabs around them. But they also don't want Israel to expand territorially, and they don't want Israel to build their temple and take over the Temple Mount. They'll have a resistance there. Matter of fact, we realize that will continue to happen even after Ezekiel 38, because, and those countries in Psalm 83 that I'm kind of referring to in the first war, those countries in Ezekiel 38 are predominantly all Muslim apart from Russia. So you can have 600 to 800,000 or so core Muslims that are killed, imprisoned, or exiled in these two massive wars. But even still, Islam will exist, and the international community will still have concerns about the Temple Mount and the Jews building their temple, to the point where ultimately they have to sign a covenant to build their temple that allows the Gentiles to trot over Jerusalem for 3.5 years and have access to the outer court. So there's always going to be this friction, because Israel will say, that's our Temple Mount, that's our land, we're going to take it, part of the promised land, the Temple Mount, we're going to build our temple. And we know they will, according to prophecy. But they're always going to find resistance, to the point where they ultimately have to negotiate with the Gentiles to even build their temple.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to watch everything develop. Diane Ailman says, isn't the IDF becoming the mighty army that the Bible says?
This to me, is that Diane you said?
Yes.
Hey, Diane, you hit a nerve with me right there when you said that. I'm going to read Ezekiel 37. The dry bones vision of Ezekiel 37 is where we find out that Israel today the emergence of an exceedingly great army was predicted 2,500, 2,600 years ago by Ezekiel. Here's what it says. When the Jews are out in the diaspora, scattered in the nations of the world, Ezekiel was transported, in my estimation, in time, 2,500 years ago, into the Holocaust situation. He sees this valley of dry bones, very dry bones, vast valley, lots of dry bones. And God has him prophesy, and the bones start to stand up, and the sinews come upon them, the skin, flesh come upon them. And then he says this in Ezekiel 37, 10 through 12. I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceedingly great army. And he says this, it said, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They indeed say, our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. And that's the condition they found themselves in the Holocaust. You know, we didn't know how long the diaspora would last. We weren't really given a specific time. It was 1,878 years, from 70 AD to 1948 AD. But we found out the time is the metric of time was summed up in their condition that they found themselves in when they were in the Holocaust. So we find that in Ezekiel 37:11. Verse 12 says, Therefore prophesy to them, says the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. So the scenario is he's going to bring them out of the Holocaust into the land of Israel. They're going to meet all this resistance with the wars with the Arabs, and we see it massively right now. And in the process, they're going to become an exceedingly great army. So it's exciting for us who are following prophecy to realize when you see pagers blow up that were planned for like 2 years in the making to put this together, all those pagers going off at once. When you see Ismail Haniyeh blown up in a room in Iran, the leader of Hamas, when you see Iron Dome taking out missiles coming over the skies, David Sling, etc., walkie-talkies, you name it, taking out the top leaders. Recently, the charts you see on the news now, they show that 16 of the 19 Hezbollah's top terrorists have been taken out. Now, this is not going to dismantle Hezbollah by no stretch of the imagination, but you're seeing a prophecy in Ezekiel 37:10 find fulfillment. And Tom and I, in this documentary we put together, we get into the Israeli Defense Forces in the pre-tribulation wars, because they're not fighting in the tribulation and they're not fighting in the millennium, and I can explain why, time permitting. We're going to see them in a war with Syria. They're going to destroy Damascus in Isaiah 17. They're going to deal with Hezbollah and the Sidon prophecy in Ezekiel 28 and Psalm 83. The Palestinians, we just read about in Obadiah. There's also in Ezekiel 25. There's a whole list here. I won't go through them, but you got Hamas, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and all the hostile neighbors, a part of Psalm 83. So to me, Diane, you let's get people watching that fact. The Israeli Defense Forces are not an accident in history. They are emerging as an exceedingly great army in fulfillment of a 2,500-year-old prophecy.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. You know, just looking at the pagers and the walkie-talkies alone, I mean, they just took everything to another level, and I watched the hatred against Israel over that. Hey, here's why they hate them, because the Jews thought of this. They were outsmarted. Nobody else thought it. Did anybody else see this coming? No. They didn't think of it, and they thought that, you know, and they hate them because they're Israel. They hate them because they're Jews also. And so they're so troubled that they were outgunned and outsmarted. And also, Bill, I look at this. This is the most humane war act I've ever, probably in the history of the whole world. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, you look at wars, civilian casualty is often enormous in any war, not this time. It's just remarkable to see what Israel has done, and an exceedingly great army. And if they're here now, where are they going to be in 5 more years? Because God is with them. And that's offensive to people, but this is what the Bible teaches.
Well, they're going to win the wars so that they can dwell securely. You know, Ezekiel 28, verses 24 through 26. In fact, I think I'm just going to read it because it's really fascinating. And I think it's important that we understand this, because I think this is what we should be watching for. This is the Sidon prophecy, verses 20 through 23. I'll let the viewers read that, or watch our show we did about a month ago if they can find it. I've got one on my YouTube channel. Just search Bill Salus, Salus. You'll find my show on the Sidon prophecies. But basically, God said that there's evil neighbors around them. I'm going to read you 3 verses real quickly. Verse 24, there shall no longer be a pricking briar or a painful thorn for the house of Israel from among those all around them who despise them. Then they shall know that I'm the Lord God. says, thus says the Lord, verse 25, when I've gathered the house of Israel from all the peoples around among whom they are scattered, and am hallowed in them in the sight of the Gentiles, and they will dwell in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. And they will dwell safely there, and they'll build houses and plant vineyards, yes, they will dwell securely. But when I execute judgments upon all those around them who despise them, then they shall know I'm the Lord. So judgments have to be executed upon those around Israel that despise them. Those judgments are going to be dealt through by the Lord to the hand of the Israeli Defense Forces. They're going to defeat them soundly, become an exceedingly great army. God's plan for Israel was that they were going to be dwell safely, we're told there. They're going to build houses, there'll be home building, there'll be vineyard planting, there'll be a robust nation. But they can't do that right now because of the problems around the pricking briar and the painful thorn. That's got to be taken out of the way, and that's going to be taken out of the way. And that's just another one of these prophecies we're watching for right here, Tom.
Wow. That's so insightful to hear this. You know, how many years I think I met you back in 2008. And how many years have you been talking about these things and warning people and just seeing things come together? And again, maybe this isn't it, but I'm looking, Bill, going, it is fascinating, the scriptures that you're bringing out. I mean, it's hard to, how do you say, well, the Bible says this, but it doesn't really mean that? Especially when the passage you're just reading, where how Israel's going to be blessed, and this isn't just necessarily in the millennial kingdom, but talking about even things coming up quickly after this.
Yeah, because the Israeli Defense Forces, in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, are fighting before the tribulation. And that's why our documentary is really important for your viewers to get their hands on, where we go through all these passages that we just talked about and more, many, many more. Very well done with graphics and slides and images, etc. But they're not fighting in the tribulation because in the first half of the tribulation, they're living at peace because of the confirmation of the false covenant. They don't feel that they feel like they're at peace. Now, it's a pseudo peace because it gets violated at the mid part of the tribulation when the Antichrist goes into the temple and does the abomination and desolation and desecrates the temple. And then Jesus says to the Jewish people in Matthew 24, flee immediately when you see that happen, spoken by Daniel the prophet, when the Antichrist does the abomination spoken by Daniel in the holy place. Flee immediately. So the Jews are going to be fleeing, not fighting. Mm-hmm. And in the millennium, the swords are going to be, the swords are going to turn into plowshares, and the spears and the pruning hooks, and they will not learn war anymore, it says in Micah. So basically, at this point, the only time they would be fighting is for their lives and existence right now, and we're watching it manifest, and the exceedingly great army is emerging before our very eyes, Tom.
Amen. By the way, everybody, the documentary that Bill is referring to, it's available on DVD. It's also available on digital download, where you can literally watch it right when we're done here. And you can visit the Hope for Our Times store, online store, and you can get those things there. So I had a question just a minute ago about the there it is, Dennis Dwanke. Is the U.S. still supporting Israel? I mean, I'm watching, man, we don't even have to get into Kamala Harris, but what do you see right now? I mean, I'm watching the news this morning. There's troops going over there. However, Bill, I have this article here. I got to find it here. I'll find it while you're talking. But is the U.S. still supporting Israel?
Well, that's a tough question, Tom. I mean, it's kind of bittersweet. We're not really, in my estimation, supporting them full throttle like we should be. Mm-hmm. For Genesis 12, God's foreign policy was initiated or issued 4,000 years ago in Genesis 12. I'll bless those who bless you, Abraham, on through his descendants, the Jewish people. I'll curse those who curse you. So America's so far fallen right now, said goodbye to God over the 60 years now. Our last hope is to bless Israel, in my estimation. And I think that's another thing we're watching for, and I think the people in the Middle East are watching closely, is America's support for Israel, and how that support will either wane worse like it's doing now, or get better like if Donald Trump wins the presidency. Donald Trump would probably be very, very pro-Israel. He did more for Israel than any other presidents in history. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital. He recognized Golan Heights as their territory, etc. He got out of the Iran nuclear deal, that bogus deal. So, I mean, and I think that's coming into play here as Israel's making their moves. In other words, what if he doesn't win and we get more of Joe Biden, or even worse with Kamala Harris, who's, she's no real friend of Israel's, from what I've seen in her history.
I think Kamala Harris will be the worst thing that could happen to Israel, along with abortion and many other things here in America. But listen, this is the Jerusalem Post. Pentagon says it has no involvement in Israel's operations. The Pentagon clarified it's not supporting Israel's operations in Lebanon, focusing only on protecting U.S. forces and assisting Israel if needed. You're looking at this going, and then you think Kamala Harris as the possibility of coming in. So, boy, Bill, I'm looking at this going, yikes. Okay, let me go here. I have several questions that have come in. One of them is from Leonard, and I have one from Larry Hart about the 10 kings I've got to get to. But let me go here first. Leonard says, is Isaiah 17 past or future? There's different views on this. Settle this, please. Bill, you and I have the same opinion on Isaiah chapter 17. I did a program with James Cadiz the other day where we talked about the same thing, Isaiah chapter 17. We are on the same page, but we know some people they feel it's not a future event. Bill, your thoughts on this? I know you and I are the same on this. Your thoughts, Isaiah 17, by the way, is the passage that talks about the destruction of Damascus. So good question, Leonard. Your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, basically, just for those not familiar with the prophecy, Isaiah 17:1 says Damascus will be destroyed. The burden against Damascus, behold, Damascus will be a ruinous heap. It'll be reduced to rubble. Verse 17:9 says the desolation is caused by the children of Israel, so it's the Israeli Defense Forces. And they didn't exist in the past on the level they are now to fulfill this prophecy. That's one argument. I got more I'll give you. Verse 14, Isaiah 17, that concludes, says, when you see him, speaking of Damascus in the masculine pronoun, but in the morning he is no more. He's gone. Overnight he's gone. And this is a portion of those that rob us and those who plunder us. That would be self-defense, Israel acting in self-defense. Here's a few people who believe Isaiah 17 is future. Joe Rosenberg, Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum, Hal Lindsey, Vernon McGee, Dr. Chuck Missler, Jack Hibbs, Amir Sarfati, Tom Hughes. I got you there, Tom Hughes, listed you there. Thomas Ice, Jan Markell, Dr. David Reagan, Brandon Holthouse, and the list goes on. Some people say that the Assyrians conquered Damascus in 732 BC. Mark Hitchcock and Andy Wood would be advocates of that. I would say basically we're told it's the children of Israel in Isaiah 17:9. Also, in Isaiah 66 books, he mentions Assyria 37 times, but not once in Isaiah 17. The Assyrians actually used Damascus historically as a provincial capital. So why would they destroy it and still rebuild it to use as a provincial capital? We're told from history that Damascus actually held out and was reduced by famine, not destroyed overnight. And the Assyrians didn't have the ability to destroy Damascus overnight anyways back in their time in 732 BC. Also, if it was destroyed in 732 BC, it would have to be rebuilt again to fulfill Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27, where Jeremiah talks about the additional camera angle on the destruction of Damascus in Jeremiah chapter 49. So you should read those passages. And I don't see any way this was fulfilled historically.
Yeah, I believe it's coming. I believe we could suddenly hear about it because all of a sudden it's gone, but especially as things are escalating. Boy, we live in exciting times, Bill, and people want more information on any of these. You can get them, the documentary plus Bill's books, the Future War Prophecies that you see here, and Future War Prophecies DVD also is available too, amongst the Psalm 83. Okay, so let's go here. Larry Hart. Jesus says that in the end there will be a world government with 10 kings formed. He will put it into men's hearts to do so. Do we want to interfere with the formation of that government? I will summarize that by this, and then you say what you want. When we look at the different prophecies, I mean, I don't see where we're going to be interfering with the formation of the 10 kings government. We can't. I mean, God's sovereign. He's going to put it in 10 kings' hearts to do what he says. But what we do is warn people. I mean, that's not interfering. So I don't know if that's what you're directing this to, Larry. I can only guess. But I mean, we warn people all the time. Hey, we can see the intention of these people out there wanting to build this globalist system. And we can see it with what they're talking about now with technology, the UN and the World Health Organization now having this global pact. If we have a Kamala Harris regime that comes in, basically, I'm looking at the sovereignty of the U.S. will be surrendered to the World Health Organization and the UN. So I look. It's not that I don't know anybody who can interfere with it. But to warn people about what's coming, which is what we do all the time, we warn people, hey, this is coming. But at the same time, we say, but God is sovereign. He's put it in the hearts of the 10 kings, so we have to understand God is sovereign. He's in control. So he warns us, but all the signs point to the great news. So we got to remember the signs are bad news in and of themselves, but they point to the great news, Jesus is coming, as that's what signs do. They say, hey, this is what lies ahead. Here's the sign, it's bad, but it's pointing to what's great. So we warn of all these different things happening. These are signs, but we know ultimately it points to Jesus is coming back. He's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem, and it is going to be great. So we just warn people and say, hey, the Bible talks about these things.
Yeah, so interfering with the 10 kings really from in the church age, to me, seems kind of impossible, because when you look at the main proof texts about where they are showing up, and you look to Revelation chapter 17, thing with ecumenical Babylon, the harlot world religion, that first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. So in 17:12, the 10 horns which you saw would be the 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but will receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. They're of one mind, and they'll give the power and authority to the beast. So in other words, they're not even going to be around noticeably. They may exist today, but they're not going to be noticeably given any authority until the Antichrist gives them that authority in the tribulation periods, namely at the mid part of the tribulation. Because their role, one of the roles they do, we're told in Revelation 17:16, says that the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, the Antichrist, the 10 kings on the Antichrist, will hate the harlot, the world religion. They'll make her desolate and naked and eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God has put it on their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast and until the words of God are fulfilled. So they may be on the scene, but we cannot really identify them at this point in time necessarily in the church age. Church is going to be raptured, I believe, before the tribulation. They're going to come on the scene in the tribulation, get their power and authority with the beast in 1 hour. And so I don't see how we can really be involved other than, like you said, Tom, to alert people that they're coming, to prepare those who get left behind, to be on the lookout for what's coming.
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. Okay, Brad Myers asks this question. Do you believe the war in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 through 9, is the same war in Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1 through 3, and Revelation 19, verses 15 through 23, that takes place at Armageddon? Do you believe do you believe Zechariah wars are the same as Revelation 19, Armageddon?
Brad Myers, he's my researcher.
Oh, no wonder why I recognize his name.
I knew this would not be an easy question, Brad.
That's funny.
First of all, I think they're two separate wars, which is not commonly taught. Everyone teaches it's Armageddon, Zechariah 12. Basically, what it says here in Zechariah 12:2, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling, dizziness, and some translations are drunkenness, unto all the people round about. And when they lay siege in both against Judah and against Jerusalem. Now, the Hebrew word, the different translations all say the same thing. The New King James says surrounding peoples. The ASV says peoples round about. Surrounding nations, NET. Surrounding peoples, NIV. And every translation is going to tell you, we're not dealing with the nations of the world at large. We're dealing with the surrounding peoples. And what happens is they're going to lay siege in a final attempt. I believe this will be the concluding part of Psalm 83. Their one last final attempt to lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. We're told in Zechariah 12:6, it's going to be an unsuccessful siege. Let's start with that. So one line of delineation is Zechariah 14 as a successful siege by all the nations. This is an unsuccessful siege by only the nations round about, the inner circle of countries that share common borders with Israel, the neighbors. And what's going to happen is they're going to make a final siege. It's going to be a bad choice for them. What's going to happen is it's going to say in Zechariah 12, verse 6, in that day when they lay siege on Judah and Jerusalem. I will make the governors or the captains of Judah read, that is, the Israeli defense forces. Of Judah, they'll be like a fire pan in the woodpile and like a fiery torch in the sheaves. They shall devour all the surrounding peoples on the right hand and on the left hand, the peoples round about. But Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place. So the people on the right hand and on the left are the same people we talked about, the pricking briar, the painful thorn in Ezekiel 28, verses 24 through 26. The judgments executed upon them, the Israeli defense forces will do that. Now, other reasons why this is not part of the same prophecy. When you look at Zechariah chapter 14, primarily, that's one of the main proof tests why these guys say Armageddon is talked about in Zechariah 12 and 14. It says, Zechariah 14 says, behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst, for I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem in that day, and the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Half the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city, and the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations. So the mid part of the tribulation, Antichrist comes into Jerusalem. It's the first part of the Armageddon campaign. They take over the city. They ravish the houses. They rifle the houses. They ravish the women, and they take over the city. It's a very successful siege, all the nations of the world. And at that point, the Jews are fleeing for their lives. Most of them will flee. The remnant will flee to the southern Jordan and the Petra area. Now, if we look back at Zechariah 12:6, it says the house of Judah will be like a fire and a flame, governors of Judah. They're going to devour the people on the right hand and the left. So in other words, you have to say, this is Armageddon at Zechariah 12:2 when they seize on Judah and Jerusalem. That means the Israeli defense forces are going to fight off all the armies of the world. Because it says the Lord's bringing all the armies as part of the Armageddon situation. And we just don't find that. We find in Isaiah 63 and Revelation 19 that the Lord does this single-handedly. He doesn't need the Israeli defense forces to help them. Matter of fact, they're fleeing. They're not even fighting at that point in time. So here's the main differences between Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14. It's an unsuccessful siege in Zechariah 12 by the people round about. It's a very successful siege in Zechariah 14. It's only the surrounding nations in Zechariah 12, whereas it's all nations in Zechariah 14. It's a pre-tribulation prophecy because the Israeli defense forces we talked about earlier are fighting in the pre-tribulation and fulfillment of multiple biblical prophecies. Whereas the Armageddon campaign is a tribulation prophecy, Zechariah 14. The peoples round about are gathering themselves for a siege against Judah and Jerusalem, but the Lord is gathering the Zechariah 14 armies of the world. They're gathered by God. Zechariah 12:3 talks about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone during the final siege of those peoples round about. It says all the nations that try to move it, it'll fall upon them like heavy stone and break them, cut them to pieces. And some people say, well, that's all nations. That's going to be all the nations. But basically, Jerusalem's been a burdensome stone to everybody since the inception. In 1948, it became an international zone. It wasn't even allowed to be a city. In 1949, the war in 1948, 1949, they divided Jerusalem with the Armistice Agreement. So they're meddling there. In 1967, Israel took back all of Jerusalem, but they gave the Temple Mount to the Jordan, the Walk Society, control of that. The presidents of America have been trying to meddle with Israel and two-state solutions and things like that. And it's all become a burdensome stone to all the nations. So there's a heavy stone impediment in Zechariah 12, but there's no stone impediment in Zechariah 14. They just move in. Jerusalem's not a burdensome stone. They mow it over. They take it over. They ravish the houses. They rifle the women. They're defeated by God and the IDF. Well, let me say by the IDF. God intervenes in Zechariah 12, verses 4 and 5. The whole study on this, and it's in the Future War Prophecies book. So God does help intervene, but the Israeli defense forces are empowered and they win that war. But in Zechariah 14, only God defeats them, not the Israeli defense forces. Zechariah 12, there's no captives taken. In Zechariah 14, there's the whole half of the city's taken captive. In Zechariah 12, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are very strong. In Zechariah 14, they're very weak. They can't even protect their women and their houses.
That's a lot. That is great comparison. All that's available in this book, The Future War Prophecies. That is so cool because you can just compare. People have these questions. Listen, I want to ask everybody, like, subscribe, and share. It's the only way we can combat the lies with the truth. Seriously, it's that's how we do it. By people say, I want to get involved. What can I do? Well, that's one thing. You like, subscribe, and share. Just share the video. Get the truth out there. People need to wake up. I have several more questions, Bill. We're gonna have to get to them later because we've already gone a little bit over. Gail, sorry, not gonna be able to get to your question right now, but we'll save it regarding if Psalm 83 is in play right now. Where do you see Saudi Arabia? Could you do a 1 minute? Could you do a 1 minute answer to that question, Bill?
Psalm 83 is in play. It's stage setting at this point. I think it's going to be incrementally starting to happen. And the final siege will be laid on Judah and Jerusalem in Zechariah 12:2. Saudi Arabia is the subject of 4 different prophecies. I get into them in the Future War Prophecies book. Initially, they come against Israel. They will not normalize relationships with Israel. They're part of Psalm 83. They support the Palestinians. But they will ultimately normalize relationships with Israel in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, where they're on the sideline protesting Russia's invasion with the Ezekiel 38 invaders. And they're along there with Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions with Sheba and Dedan. Sheba would be Yemen, and Dedan would be Saudi Arabia. So they do ultimately normalize relationships with Israel, but that's after they learn their lesson the hard way.
That was a great summary. That was a great summary. Listen, all of these things are available in Bill's books as DVDs. And
someday soon, the beautiful country of Israel will be surrounded by enemies on all sides. A series of devastating battles are coming, some quite familiar like Armageddon, but others far less familiar. These future wars can be hard to decipher. The countries named in Scripture have different names today. So who can we trust to rightly divide the word? One of the world's experts on these end-time wars is our friend Bill Salus. To call Bill an expert on these future wars would be a great understatement. In Bill's latest work, The Future War Prophecies, he examines these prophecies, a roadmap to the future. The prophesied destruction of Damascus, the Psalm 83 war, and the coming sneak attack by Russia, Iran, and other Islamic enemies. It's the most comprehensive book ever written on these prophecies. Bill's book or the companion DVD are available for your gift of $25 or more, with shipping included in the USA. Order the book and DVD together for $45, and as always, we'll include a surprise gift as our way of saying thanks for supporting God's ministry. For those of you who appreciate Bill's 12 years of end times research, he's released his 5 previous books and 5 previous DVDs on a flash drive he calls the Left Behind Survival Kit. It also includes a Bible and a unique DVD, Tim LaHaye's Last Prophecy Message. All this powerful information is available on this computer flash drive for your gift of $50 or more, a $200 value, with shipping included anywhere in the USA. For our international friends, please know that additional shipping costs may apply. As conflicts increase all over the world, we know that the Bible speaks of wars and rumors of wars. Soon, these end-time prophecies will explode on the world and reality will set in. We are living in exciting times that make us believe that Jesus is coming very soon. Thanks for watching today, and thanks for your faithful support of this ministry.